Voyage on T-10, the show with 10-minute takes on the future of education and healthcare. I'm your host, Tim Fitzpatrick. On today's voyage, you'll hear from Smit Patel, Associate Director at the Digital Medicine Society, better known as DiMe. Even though I've now known and followed Smit for years, this was my first time hearing about his path to becoming a pharmacist and why his personal mission aligns so well with his current work at DiMe. As a global nonprofit and professional community, DiMe aims to advance the ethical, effective, equitable, and safe use of digital medicine to redefine healthcare and improve lives. The timing of this episode was pretty fun, since their team had just publicly launched their regulatory pathway tool that same week. Let me tell you, whether you are building a digital health company or working in healthcare and thinking about using digital tools in your care settings, DiMe should be one of the first places you look for guidance. They have everything you need, from best practices and resource libraries to frameworks and playbooks. We use them all the time at Icona. Without further ado, please enjoy my deep dive on digital medicine with Smit Patel. Smit Patel, it's long overdue to have you on T-10 and to see you and to catch up. Welcome to the show. Thank you for joining me.
Absolutely. Thank you, Tim. And it's so lovely to join you again. And thank you for all you do to inspire and advance our field.
Hey, I really appreciate that. I want to start with what you're currently doing at DiMe. Could you give us an idea, obviously, what your role is, and then, of course, what that entails? You're one of those organizations that seems to be working on everything, and there's so many fascinating projects at all times, and would love to better understand your role in all of it.
Absolutely. So I'm the Associate Director here at DiMe, or Digital Medicine Society. We are a 501(c)(3) nonprofit dedicated to advancing safe, effective, ethical, and equitable use of digital technologies as we think about improving care for individuals across the board. And I think my role sits at a very interesting intersection of regulatory science and clinical care delivery that entails projects and arenas, for example, leading our partnership with VA, which is the largest health system, as VA thinks about new digital innovation in terms of how they can care for the patient, not delivering care or not providing healthcare, but essentially how can they redefine to care for the patients and individuals and veterans across the board, and then think about solutions that can be scaled in the digital health arena, because VA, as you may know, Tim, very effectively, they serve over 9 million veterans every year. And I think it's a huge healthcare system. And if we think about one of the potential of digitals is its ability to scale. So looking at from the health system's perspective. And on my other side of the role, I support regulatory science and clinical care delivery. So recently we had a pre-competitive collaborative I had led in partnership with our regulatory colleagues here in the US, Google, Abbott, MedTech organizations, life science organizations, academic partners like Harvard MIT Center of Regulatory Science, to essentially how can we demystify this cumbersome and complex and convoluted space of digital health regulations to make sure that we are building transparent, high-quality, evidence-based products that goes in the hands of patients. And then last but not the least, support some of the market development in terms of what's on the horizon. How can we think about future opportunities, and what are some of the current impediments that ecosystem as a whole is challenged with that we can solve? Because one of the things that I absolutely love is solving some of the hairiest problems that our ecosystem faces.
Incredible. And I know you do. Okay, there's so much to dig into here. I appreciate you kind of framing everything you take a look at in your capacity at DiMe. I cannot wait to dive in. So the very first thing I want to touch on, and you've talked about before, is this idea that collaboration is key. And I think your position, your organization embodies that to the full. And you've already laid out several examples of how that's the case. So taking the example of the VA partnership, which, yes, one of those 9 million, very grateful that you are able to and willing to support the VA and to bring new insights into regulatory to clinical care delivery to innovation. I absolutely love this partnership, and always start smiling when I see it hit my feed that you're doing something new with the VA. Can you use that example, or perhaps the second one you mentioned, of all of these stakeholders across healthcare, varying size organizations from different sides of healthcare too, which I find fascinating. How do you think about collaboration in this context of digital health, given thinking about it as collaboration, and why is that so important when you think about mapping that future state and those and seeing those current challenges you described at the end?
Absolutely. I would love to dive in. And before I dive in, one of the things I want to highlight is I grew up in India, which is a land of over 1.2 billion people. And one of the things if I learned from India before moving to the States 5 years ago was this power of connectedness and things we can do together than by ourselves was one of the impeding factors on terms of like why and what motivated me to join Dime. And something that Dime embodies is this role of convener. Um, I have a strong opinions and something I recently heard from Brandon O'Leary, the deputy director at FDA. He talks about is digital health is a sports team. It's a team sport. Digital health is a team sport, and at the end of the day, we are all driving towards that one common goal. Is I call it in Hindi called seva, which means serving patients or serving individuals who are in the need, be it in the need of elevating the pain or getting over a disease or disorder, managing their disease or disorder. At the end of the day, everyone in healthcare has that common end goal of serving individuals and patients. So one of the roles that Dime plays, and it's super critical as we think about digital health field, is we can start from scratch. You know, in 1800s and 1900s, when there were small molecule discoveries and discoveries for, say, vaccines and biologics that were happening in 1900s, that time the industries were siloed, and they were siloed for right reasons because we didn't have the technology to connect us. Think about in 1900s, or maybe the time when I was born in 1990s, we didn't have telephone access or we didn't have mobile access or smartphones during that time. Like www bubble just started in 1999. Compared to today, the world is more connected. We have tools and resources that can actually connect people. And I think if we want to build solutions, if we want to build communities who will use these solutions to drive better healthcare and to drive more care for individuals, we need to think about from a collaborative approaches so that we are not building something that works for one stakeholder doesn't work for the other, but rather we are building digital health products and any product that works for every stakeholder, be it regulators, be it investors, be it payers who are going to reimburse for it, or be health systems who are going to implement it and adopt it, uh, that will essentially drive towards better healthcare.
You mentioned this is so helpful to talk through, and I wonder now how much your background and path. You mentioned what drew you to Dime, and could we take a second? And I think it's important. I know it's important. You mentioned moving here 5 years ago. I know the school you went through, your training. If you could kind of give people an idea where those last 5 years, how you spent them, how you arrived in your current position at Dime.
Absolutely, would be happy to. So I was a pharmacist back in India, and when I moved here, I started working in the market development division of a small pharma. But there was a missing piece that I had was going back and getting my degree and getting the doctorate here in the US. So went to the Ohio State University to get my PharmD. During that time, I think I realized that it is important to learn science. It's important to learn clinical aspects of it, which I absolutely enjoyed and talking to patients and caring for them. But there was this penchant that I had since the first year of pharmacy school as a part of the MIT and Harvard Medical School's Health Innovation Program, where I had an opportunity to build this device. We call it medical device in today's world now, but in 2016 it was still a product. Sounds wild, but the idea came from my mom, who also immigrated with myself. She was uncomfortable with getting cervical cancer screening here with a white male physician, and she was not able to find a female physician during that time. And that idea and concept we took into at the MIT and Harvard in a collaborative group, which were filled with engineers and designers, and we build a medical devices, which sounds funny and borderline crazy, but it's kind of like shape of a dildo, which has a retractable brush that collects vaginal tissues, and with a liquid solution that gets stored in it. Mind blowing. In school, we learn a lot and learned a lot about problems, but at that place at MIT and Harvard, I got to create tools, use my creativity, and create solutions that essentially work for a lot of people and for a lot of women, for a very important cause and preventing cervical cancer. So I think that ignited me, and over time I try to learn with a digital health tech startup in the payer space, to also consulting with AmerisourceBergen in the digital therapeutic space. That led my way to DiMe, where learning from pharma, life science, a clinical side of the shop, the payment side, and a little bit of consulting all together to hopefully be a little bit valuable asset here at DiMe.
Well, I can tell you, as one person, and I hope you hear this all the time, the things you build at DiMe, the things you put together, the collaborations and what they result in are incredibly helpful for those of us who are building in the early stage digital health landscape. I really enjoy, obviously, hearing people's backstories, their origin stories, how they get to where they are. It sounds, and of course, you're telling this story now in hindsight, but all of these pieces and parts that ended up in the role you're in now that fits so nicely into your interests. You know, you talked about what drew you initially in this idea that in 2016 a product would be considered a medical device today. That's a great segue for us, because I want to also touch on a case study, an example of one resource in particular that I can't imagine the amount of lift and collaboration that went into it, but you announced it last week, I believe it was, maybe the week before, this RegPath tool to help people, I'd imagine, who are now in the world of medical devices, who 5-6 years ago may not have realized it was medical device, or having to understand and figure out, where does regulatory landscape, where do they fit in that landscape? Is it expanding? Does it affect what it is that they're even thinking about building? And depending on where they are in building that product, how should they be interacting and exploring the paths ahead? Could you talk about that as just one example of something you built? Give us an idea of kind of what it is, how it helps companies, and then what it took to bring it to life.
Absolutely, I would love to. It's something hot in my mind right now these days, and something that a need. Hopefully, we have created tools and resources for individuals as they think about navigating this complex landscape. And Tim, as you just mentioned, around in 2016 when I had built a product, I had no idea if that's a regulated product versus if that's a non-regulated product, or like skating the line, where to find resources, who to go to, who to talk to. And I think now in the hindsight, one of the things for viewers and listeners who are joining us today, DiMe had led for the 8 months a pre-competitive collaborative called Digital Health Regulatory Pathways Project, that brought together stakeholders from tech, medtech, life science, academic partners, trade associations, digital health innovators, all together to create free resources for our developers community and innovators community as they think about um, going across and navigating this landscape of digital health regulations and policies. And I tell this because I recently heard, and I change it a little bit in terms of when I think of navigating regulations in US, it's kind of like teenage sex. A lot of people wants to do it or does it, but don't know how to optimally do it, or how to do it right. And it's very interesting because the space is so cumbersome. It is so complex. Even myself, like there are many nuances to it, and for right reasons. For a very long time in 1976, when the first laws that gave FDA the authority to regulate medical devices, that time we were talking about a completely different set of devices. There were hardware devices in 1980s. There were MRIs that came in place. There were dental fixtures, and there were pacemakers. Those are traditional hardware devices. In 2020 and beyond, we are talking about software products, software-based medical devices, digital therapeutics, digital applications, mobile applications, AI/ML approaches, novel digital endpoints that are used to inform digital technologies. What do innovators do? Where do they find resources? How do they know if they should be regulated or not? If they are regulated, what's the right pathway for them? It's not like drug world that everything should be approved. these medical devices have different kinds of risks, and sometimes they only need a marketing clearance by a 510K. Or if their risk is a little bit higher and they're class 2, they may need to go to de novo pathway if it's a novel product. Or if there's a higher risk to it, they may need to go through a pre-market approval. There are differences to that. And I think what DiMe has done in this collaborative is create a world's first navigation tool. It's an interactive tool. You can answer a few questions that will lead to what's the most likely regulatory pathway for your product, or should you be regulated or not. And then we have over 50 resources to help you build the right regulatory strategy, because for a very long time we have missed this concept that we need to reiterate on the fact is a fit for purpose regulatory strategy is a good business strategy. Think about regulations, not once you have built the product, but much early on when you are designing, when you are in the early development phase, when you are in the discovery phase, around how you map your regulatory strategy that will impact short and long-term commercial and business decision making.
Well, as someone that's already tried the tool and sent it to at least a dozen, if not more, people in my Rolodex, just to say, hey, this is something that we've discussed in the past. Can't tell you we've been doing this 6 years at Icona, and wondered a lot of times, hey, how should we be thinking about this strategy if the product roadmap takes us in this direction? And how does that direction of the product with our customers compare against what is currently being regulated on the software side, on the hardware side? And it's just been one of those fascinating problems that, like you point out, is really daunting and overwhelming. And I think about the job of an innovator in today's market, where more and more consumers want to be aware of their health, and all these devices are popping up, and the importance of being able to de-risk the regulatory path, especially where there is going to be more oversight, and that's a good thing to be able to differentiate among products, to ensure that products are going through the right hurdles to get to market. You can't iterate enough for anyone else who's out there thinking of starting something or is running their early stage business and is either attracting capital, attracting customers, trying to find their new hires. Like, this tool is such an important part of that arsenal and that decision-making process. So I'm excited and grateful again for you and all the effort that I'm sure it took to get it done. I'd love to kind of start shifting towards what you're optimistic about, the things that you're excited about, and then of course we'll wrap up with the final frontier. But if we could take a minute, you must see, especially given your background, you've spent a lot of time in all different sides of healthcare, like we've discussed, and now you're thinking about regulatory pathways. You likely have a really good understanding, or much better than most, about what is being regulated and where there are opportunities, and where more and more data is becoming available to then make decisions. What are you excited about? Like, which applications or indications or types of tools? What comes to mind when you think about the next several years of digital health?
Wow, we can talk about this for over an hour, and I'll still not bore you or get bored by. But I think there are a couple of threads that I'm really excited about. Is thinking about regulatory is a really good step as a part of the digital health development process. It is not the final step. The final step, there are two more things if we think about before it reaches the patients who are going to use it and who will benefit from that. The second piece following this that I'm really keen about, and hopefully the digital health industry will work on this super closely and are working on this super closely, is around reimbursement pathways, around how do we find right reimbursement pathways for these innovative products and have the right market access strategies and channels that will provide access to these newer technologies for patients. And then once they are reimbursement pathway, one of the things that I think will take the majority of the chunk over the next couple of years is getting the implementation science right. What I mean by implementation science is not just having a tool that is regulated that can be reimbursed, but rather how it will be adopted, in what capacity, what will we learn about those adoption measures. There are threads around from the operational side of implementation, whether it's implemented in clinic, in a health system. There are questions around in the data components in terms of data interoperability, data sharing, data access, who has it. And then there are questions around how do we build trust in patients at the end of the day so that it's not just a transactional thing where people are using a tool for one time. They're like, oh, now I'm bored. I'm not going to use a digital therapeutic that was prescribed to me. So I think we need to get those pieces of reimbursement and then implementation right if we want to have a wide adoption of these various new innovations for patients, because we are changing. Digital health will become health, and that is something that I'm very much looking forward to in the next few months.
What I love about that answer is you essentially tackled the opportunities and the challenges at the same time. So I appreciate you kind of framing it that way. And it's a wonderful segue into something we're introducing here. We've already touched on a couple of the questions I'm about to ask you, but let's wrap up this conversation with what we're going to call the final frontier. It's a fast 5 questions in under 60 seconds. Smit, are you ready?
I am more than ready.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Let's run this back. So what do you think is the top challenge in digital health today?
Building trust across the ecosystem, especially in patients and especially in clinicians who are going to be the end users.
Amazing. What is the top opportunity?
I think one of the unforgotten assets around the minute little things of it feels minute, but it has mega impact. Getting the ethics, equity, privacy, and security measures for various kinds of products, right, is the largest opportunity that we should be honing if we want to build the right trust amongst all people.
I love that. How about the tech trend you're following?
AI/ML approaches and its potential in healthcare, but more so, I'm focused and very interested in oncology space because digital health innovation is lagging so much, and the most or the largest impact we can have on the individuals living with cancer is significant.
Media, top media rec, either book, podcast, something great you've consumed lately on the subject.
Brian Dolan's Exit and Outcome newsletter, DTX podcast by Eugene Berkovich, Stat newsletter.
All amazing. Love it. And then lastly, let's wrap up with a healthcare leader or someone in the field that you're following, learning from.
Gosh, I can just say my boss name, Jen Goltek, but I'm not allowed. So, but I think there are so many. Benjamin Schwartz is an orthopedic and talks a lot about health tech. Really amazing. Joe Canali on virtual care. Ami Bhatt from American Cardiology Association. Geeta Nair, Grace Curran. I don't want to butcher her name, but Grace Cordovano, who talks a lot about patients and what are patients' challenges. And I think those are the inspiring figures.
Incredible. Smit Patel, thank you so much for joining us, for doing the first Final Frontier. It was incredible having you on T-10. Before we wrap up, where can people find you, get a hold of you, and talk after the show if they resonate with your message?
Absolutely. I am active on LinkedIn, and we will share our LinkedIn link with the colleagues who are listening to this. I'm very active. Please feel free to send me a message or an invite, and I would love to connect with you, and let's drive this field together.
Absolutely. Well, we certainly will. We can't thank you enough. We'll make sure that all the notes that we talked about on the show, all the references, all the items, all the people are listed in the show notes in this episode. Smit, thank you again for joining us. Really good to have you on T-10.
Thank you for having me, and this was really great. I look forward to it.